Her family sold her as infertile, but the mountain man got her pregnant in 3 days. In the dead of a Colorado winter, a broken woman is traded like cattle. $5 silver for a life her kin said was worthless. But when the stranger who buys her takes her deep into the mountains, she discovers something she never expected. Kindness. Snow howls outside his cabin. Firelight flickers across his face, and for the first time she's not afraid. Yet in that same storm, a secret is born, one that will shake an entire town to its knees. Because 3 days later, what her family called impossible becomes a miracle no one can explain. As whispers spread and the law closes in, hearts, faith, and reputations will be tested by a truth too wild for the frontier to believe. When a woman the world called barren carries the promise of new life, will love and faith be enough to survive the storm that follows? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through the campfire's wavering light, Ellen watched Dale Hale tend to the horses. His movements were purposeful but gentle, his broad shoulders hunched against the bitter wind that swept down from the mountains. The frozen stream beside their camp sang a thin, crystalline song beneath its layer of ice. $5 silver and a crate of jerky. That's what she was worth to her family. The thought made her stomach clench, though the bowl of rabbit stew Dale had insisted she eat first sat warm in her belly. Ellen pulled his offered blanket tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and leather. "Ma'am?" Dale's quiet voice broke through her dark thoughts. He stood a respectful distance from where she sat on a fallen log, his weather-worn face illuminated by the dancing flames. "I've got coffee brewing, if you'd care for some." Ellen nodded, not trusting her voice. Her fingers trembled as she accepted the tin cup he carefully passed to her. The metal was almost too hot to hold, but she welcomed the burn. It reminded her she could still feel something besides the hollow ache in her chest. "Much obliged," she managed to whisper. The words felt strange in her mouth, speaking to this man who had bought her like cattle, yet treated her with more dignity than her own flesh and blood. Dale settled himself on the other side of the fire, his movements slow and deliberate. He poured his own cup of coffee but didn't drink, instead studying the dark liquid as if it held answers to unspoken questions. "Miss Ward," he began, then cleared his throat. "Ellen, I reckon you ought to know something about me and about why I—" He trailed off, searching for words. The wind moaned through the pines, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its mate. Ellen waited, her heart beating an uneven rhythm against her ribs. "5 years ago, I had a wife," Dale continued, softly. "Sarah. And a little one on the way. Lost them both in a spring blizzard when I was too far out on my trap line to get back in time." His voice carried no self-pity, only a deep, abiding sorrow that Ellen recognized all too well. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. Loss was a language she understood fluently. "What your father and brother-in-law did today wasn't right," Dale said, meeting her eyes across the flames. "Treating you like property to be traded. But when I heard them talking about you in town yesterday, heard how they meant to—" He shook his head, jaw tightening. "Well, I couldn't abide it. Couldn't let them sell you to old Marcus Tate and his mean ways." Ellen's breath caught. Marcus Tate, the widow man from up Carson's Ridgeway, known for working his last wife into an early grave. So that had been their plan for her. "I know it ain't much better being bought by a stranger," Dale continued. "But I want you to understand, I mean to give you a proper home, Miss Ellen. Not as a servant or—" He flushed slightly. "What I mean to say is, if you'll have me, I aim to make an honest marriage of it. And if you don't want that, well, I've got connections with the sisters at the mission in Pueblo. They'd take you in, no questions asked." The coffee in Ellen's cup had grown cold, but she hardly noticed. She studied the man across the fire, his steady hands, the silver threading his dark hair, the way he offered her choices when her own family had given her none. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why would you do either of those things for me? Dale was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. Sparks rose like fireflies into the night sky. Because every soul deserves the chance to choose their own path, he finally said, and because I've seen too much cruelty in this world to add to it, even by standing aside and letting it happen. Ellen felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time since leaving the farmhouse. She blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall. "They told you I was barren," she said, the words bitter as medicine. "That I lost 2 babies and couldn't carry another." "They told me a lot of things," Dale replied evenly, "but I reckon that's between you and the good Lord above, not for men to judge or condemn." A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Ellen watched them fade into the darkness, thinking of all she'd lost, not just the babies that never drew breath, but her place in the world, her family's love, her faith in God's mercy. Yet here sat this quiet man who spoke of choice and dignity as if they were her natural right. "There's a storm coming," Dale said, glancing at the heavy clouds gathering overhead. "We should try to make it to my cabin tomorrow before the weather turns. It's about 4 hours' ride up Bitter Creek way." He hesitated. "Whatever you decide about everything else, you'll be safe there till spring." Ellen nodded, her thoughts whirling like the wind through the pines. "I think," she started, then found her courage and started again. "I think I'd like to see this cabin of yours, Mr. Hale." "Dale," he corrected gently. "If you're willing, you might as well call me Dale." "Dale," she echoed, testing the name. It felt right somehow, solid and unpretentious as the man himself. He stood, gathering their cups. "You should get some rest, Miss Ellen. I'll keep watch." "Ellen," she said. "Just Ellen." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Ellen, then." He moved away to check the horses one last time, his footsteps nearly silent on the frozen ground. Ellen lay down on her bedroll, Dale's blanket wrapped tight around her. The fire crackled softly, and she could hear him moving quietly around the camp, setting things in order. Strange, how she felt safer here in the wilderness with this near stranger than she had in her own home these past years. Sleep was a long time coming. Ellen lay awake, watching the stars wheel overhead through gaps in the clouds. She thought of Sarah, Dale's wife who never got to hold her baby, of her own lost little ones, and how their passing had turned her family's love to ash, of Marcus Tate's cold eyes and cruel reputation, and how close she had come to that fate. $5 silver and a crate of jerky. But maybe, she thought, as exhaustion finally pulled her toward sleep, maybe sometimes salvation came disguised as a transaction. Maybe God hadn't abandoned her after all, but had sent this quiet man with gentle hands and a heart big enough to offer shelter to a stranger. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was Dale's steady presence nearby, and the way he had said, "If you'll have me," as if she were something precious instead of something broken to be bartered away. Morning came with iron-gray skies and a wind that carried the promise of snow. Ellen woke to find Dale already up, cooking breakfast over a freshly built fire. The smell of coffee and frying salt pork made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten properly in days before last night's stew. "Morning," Dale said, handing her a tin plate loaded with pork, beans, and a thick slice of cornbread. "Eat up. We've got a good ride ahead of us." Ellen took the plate, noting again how he served her first. Such a small thing, but it spoke volumes about the man's character. "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the breakfast. They broke camp efficiently, Dale showing her how he preferred things packed and stored. He didn't hover or command, just demonstrated and let her learn. By the time they mounted up, the sky was spitting the first few flakes of snow. "Stay close," Dale advised as they set out. "Trail gets tricky in weather like this." Ellen guided her horse, a steady bay mare Dale called Maple, close behind his own mount. The path wound through stands of pine and aspen, climbing steadily into rougher country. Despite the cold, Ellen found herself drinking in the wild beauty around them. The way snow gathered like lace on bare branches, the flash of a red-tailed hawk against the pewter sky, the soft shush of their horses' hooves through fresh powder. Time seemed to move differently here in the high country. The hours of their ride blended together like watercolors, marked only by brief stops to rest the horses and share sips of water from Dale's canteen. He didn't press her to talk, but when she asked questions about the land or the wildlife they spotted, he answered readily, sharing his deep knowledge of the territory. By early afternoon, the snow was falling steadily. Ellen's cheeks burned with cold despite the woolen scarf Dale had given her to wrap around her face. Just when she was beginning to worry about the weather, Dale pointed ahead to where smoke rose through the trees. "Home," he said simply. The cabin appeared through the curtain of snow, solid logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney, a small barn set back among the pines. It wasn't large, but Ellen could see at once that it was well built and carefully maintained. A stream, Bitter Creek itself, she supposed, ran nearby, its banks lined with willows. Dale helped her dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Let's get the horses settled first," he said. "Then I'll show you inside." Working together, they quickly had the animals unsaddled, rubbed down, and settled in the barn with hay and fresh water. Ellen found herself watching Dale as they worked, the gentle way he handled the horses, how he explained what he was doing without making her feel foolish for not knowing, the quiet competence in every movement. Finally, they made their way to the cabin. Dale paused with his hand on the door latch, suddenly looking uncertain. "It ain't much," he said, "but it's warm and dry, and there's plenty of food put by for winter." Ellen touched his arm lightly, surprising herself as much as him. "Show me," she said softly. Dale pushed open the heavy wooden door, and Ellen stepped into what would become her sanctuary, though she didn't know it yet. The cabin's warmth wrapped around her like a blanket, chasing away the chill that had settled into her bones during their long ride. Pine smoke from the stone fireplace mingled with the earthy scent of cured hides hanging from the rafters, creating an aroma that spoke of wilderness and honest work. "It's just one room," Dale explained, his voice soft as he moved past her to stoke the banked fire. "Plus the lean-to where I sleep." He gestured to a narrow door in the back wall. "Thought you might prefer the main room, with the stove and all." Ellen stood just inside the doorway, taking in every detail. Afternoon light filtered through two small windows, catching dust motes in its pale beams. A cast-iron cook stove sat against the far wall, its pipe disappearing into the stone chimney. A rough-hewn table with two chairs occupied the center of the room, while a narrow cot with a wool mattress was tucked into the corner furthest from the door. Dale moved around the space with careful efficiency, lighting a lamp against the growing darkness outside. "Water barrel's there," he said, pointing to a large wooden cask near the stove. "Creek's close too, when the weather's fair. There's supplies in the root cellar under the floorboards, and plenty of firewood stacked against the north wall outside." He paused, watching her with those steady eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Come spring, if you wish to leave, I'll see you safe to wherever you want to go. You're not bound here, Ellen." The words hit her like a physical blow. After being sold like property, after years of being told her worth lay only in what her body could or couldn't do, this man was offering her choice. Freedom, She turned away, unable to bear the kindness in his face. "I'm not hungry," she said, though her stomach cramped with emptiness. It was a test, she realized, to see if he'd force her, like others had forced their will upon her. Dale just nodded. "Stew's in the pot when you change your mind." He moved to a trunk near his sleeping room and pulled out a worn blanket with a long tear down one side. Settling into one of the chairs, he began to mend it with neat, even stitches. Ellen watched him from the corner of her eye as she explored the cabin's confines. Everything was simple but well-maintained. Shelves stocked with preserved foods, hooks holding clean cooking implements, a stack of split logs by the stove. No luxuries, but no signs of neglect either. As promised, a pot of stew simmered on the back of the stove. The rich smell of beef and vegetables made her mouth water, but pride kept her from reaching for the ladle. Instead, she sat on the edge of the cot, still wearing her coat, and stared into the fire. Dale continued his mending in companionable silence. When the blanket was fixed, he rose and placed it at the foot of her cot. "Extra warmth," he said simply. "Nights get cold up here." Then he ladled a generous portion of stew into a bowl, set it on the table with a spoon and a thick slice of bread, and retired to his lean-to. Ellen listened to him moving around in the small space, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of clothing, the soft thud of boots being removed. The bowl of stew sat untouched, steam rising in lazy spirals in the lamplight. Hours passed. Darkness pressed against the windows. The fire burned low, and Ellen's stomach growled louder. Finally, when all had been quiet in Dale's room for some time, she crept to the table and picked up the spoon. The stew was barely warm now, but it was still the best thing she'd tasted in months. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, tears pricking at her eyes as she remembered Dale's words. "You'll eat before I do." Such a simple promise, kept without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. She was just finishing the last of the bread when she heard it. Dale's voice, low and gentle, carrying through the thin wall of his lean-to. He was praying. "Lord," he said, "I ask your blessing on this house tonight. Grant peace to two strangers who've both been wronged. Give wisdom to my hands and heart, that I might offer shelter without causing fear. And Lord," here his voice caught slightly, "Lord, help us both remember that your love makes all things new." Ellen sat frozen, the empty bowl forgotten in her hands. Something inside her, something hard and defensive that had been built up over years of loss and betrayal, cracked at his words. She pressed her fingers to her lips, holding back a sob. This man, this stranger who had bought her for $5 silver and a crate of jerky, was asking God's blessing not just for her, but for them both. He counted himself among the wronged, yet there was no bitterness in his prayer, only a quiet plea for guidance. She rose shakily and carried the bowl to the wash basin, cleaning it and the spoon as silently as she could. Then she added wood to the fire, its warm light filling the cabin with soft shadows. The mended blanket, when she wrapped it around her shoulders, smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, like Dale himself. From his room came the sound of steady breathing. Ellen lay down on the cot, pulling both blankets close around her. Outside, snow continued to fall, dusting the wilderness in white. But here, in this simple cabin that smelled of pine smoke and honest work, something new was taking root. It wasn't trust, not yet. She'd been hurt too deeply for that. But as she drifted towards sleep, Ellen realized it might be hope. Hope that kindness could exist without conditions. Hope that prayers spoken in the dark might be answered. Hope that even a heart as scarred as hers could learn to beat freely again. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the cry of a lone coyote in the distance, its voice rising pure and wild above the silent snow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she was warm, she was fed, and she was, against all odds, beginning to feel safe. Dale's words echoed in her mind. "You're not bound here." And perhaps that was why, for the first time in years, she felt truly free. Not because she could leave, but because she was being given the dignity of choice. In this small cabin on Bitter Creek, with a gentle man's prayer still hanging in the air, Ellen Ward closed her eyes and let herself rest. Morning came with a brightness that hurt the eyes. Sunlight reflected off the fresh snow, turning the world outside the cabin windows into a dazzling white expanse. The temperature had dropped sharply overnight, leaving intricate frost patterns on the glass panes. Ellen woke to the rhythmic sound of chopping wood. She pulled the mended blanket tighter around her shoulders and moved to the window. Dale was already hard at work, his broad shoulders moving with practiced efficiency as he split log after log. His breath came out in white clouds in the bitter cold, but he worked steadily, adding to the already substantial woodpile. She watched him for a moment, noting how he paused occasionally to scan the horizon, his expression thoughtful. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, about the way he seemed completely at peace with his solitary task. The cabin felt different in the morning light. What had seemed confining in the darkness now felt almost welcoming, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the cook stove radiating steady warmth. Ellen found herself moving around the space, straightening what little there was to straighten. Her hands needed occupation, and the simple tasks helped quiet her racing thoughts. As she wiped dust from a crude shelf near the stove, her fingers brushed against something leather-bound and small. Pulling it carefully from its resting place, she found herself holding a Bible, its cover worn soft with age and use. The spine had been carefully repaired with neat stitches of strong thread, the same careful workmanship she'd seen in the mended blanket. The door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air. Dale stamped his boots free of snow before stepping inside, carrying an armload of split wood. He paused when he saw what she held, and something flickered across his face. Not anger at her touching his belongings, but a deeper emotion she couldn't quite name. "It was my wife's," he said softly, setting the wood beside the stove. "Sarah's. Lost her and our boy 6 winters ago." His voice was gentle, matter-of-fact, but Ellen could hear the old pain beneath the words. "Benjamin would have been 8 this year." Ellen carefully returned the Bible to its shelf, her throat tight. This explained so much: the careful way he treated her, the separate sleeping spaces, the quiet prayers. He knew what it was to lose everything, to have life turn cruel and cold as a winter storm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and meant it. Dale nodded once, accepting her words without demanding more. He moved to the window, studying the sky with a practiced eye. The brilliant morning had given way to something else, clouds building in thick gray layers that seemed to press down on the mountain peaks. "Storm's coming," he said, his tone shifting to one of practical concern. "Bad one by the look of it. Need to secure the livestock before it hits." Ellen watched as he pulled on his heavy coat and gloves. "Can I help?" He considered her offer for a moment. "Much obliged, but best get the inside ready instead. Check the water barrels full, and there's canvas and rags in that trunk there. Might need them later if the wind finds any gaps." The next few hours passed in preparation. Dale worked outside, moving between the small barn and the cabin with quick efficiency. Ellen could hear him hammering, reinforcing something against the coming storm. Inside, she filled every available container with water from the barrel, laid out candles and matches where they could be easily found, and gathered the suggested supplies for patches. By noon, the sky had turned the color of old iron. The wind picked up, driving tiny ice crystals against the windows with increasing force. Dale came in for the last time, his face reddened from cold. "Animals are settled," he reported, hanging his coat by the door. "Got extra feed and water in with them. They'll weather it fine." He moved to the stove, adding wood with careful attention. "Might be in for a long night." As if in answer, the wind rose to a howl, rattling the window frames. The temperature seemed to plummet by the minute, and Ellen could feel cold air seeping in through tiny gaps in the walls. The fire in the stove sputtered and danced as gusts found their way down the chimney. "Here," Dale said, noticing her shiver. He handed her several quilts from a chest she hadn't noticed before. "Storm's found some holes. We'll need to patch them." The next hour was spent in shared labor, working their way around the cabin's interior. Dale would hold the lantern while Ellen pressed rags into gaps where the wind whistled through. Then they'd secure canvas over larger spaces, working together without need for many words. The physical task helped calm her nerves as the storm's voice grew louder outside. When the fire stuttered again, Ellen found herself automatically moving to help Dale shield it with a piece of tin. Their hands brushed briefly as they positioned the makeshift windbreak, and she was surprised to find she didn't flinch away. Necessity was burning away her pride, her fear, her suspicion. They needed each other to survive this night. "Reckon we ought to eat while we can," Dale said when they'd done all they could to secure the cabin. He pulled out cornmeal and a cast-iron skillet, mixing batter with practiced hands. Soon, the smell of baking cornbread joined the scent of wood smoke and snow. The storm reached full fury as night fell. Wind screamed around the cabin's corners, and snow hit the walls with such force it sounded like thrown sand. Ellen found herself grateful for every log they'd carried in, every gap they'd patched, every preparation they'd made. Dale divided the cornbread fairly, setting half on a plate for her along with a cup of strong coffee. They retreated to opposite sides of the room, Ellen to her cot, Dale to his chair near the stove, each wrapped in quilts against the creeping cold. The hot coffee and warm bread helped, but Ellen couldn't stop shivering. Not just from cold, but from the wild sound of the storm. It brought back memories of other winter nights, of losses she'd rather forget. She pulled the quilts tighter, trying to hide her trembling. "Storm can't touch us in here," Dale said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Cabin stood through worse." Ellen looked at him across the room, really looked at him for the first time. In the lamplight, she could see the grief lines around his eyes, the way he held himself as if carrying an invisible weight. Yet there was peace in his face, too, a hard-won acceptance of life's bitter mercies. "How did you—" she started, then stopped, unsure if she had the right to ask. "Lose them?" Dale finished for her. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance behind the stove's grate. "Blizzard, like this one. Sarah and Benjamin were heading back from her sister's place. Storm came up faster than anyone expected. By the time I found them—" His voice trailed off, but he didn't need to say more. The wind howled louder, making the whole cabin creak. Ellen found herself speaking, needing to fill the terrible sound with something human. "My first baby. I carried him 7 months. The second, barely 5. The words hurt coming out, like shards of ice in her throat. "After that, they said I was cursed, worthless." "They were wrong." Dale's voice was firm, though gentle. "Loss doesn't make you cursed, Ellen. Makes you human is all." Something about the simple truth in his words broke through Ellen's careful walls. Tears came, hot and sudden, but she didn't try to hide them. The storm raged outside, but here in this room, with this quiet man who knew the cost of winter, she felt strangely safe. They sat in companionable silence as the hours crept by, each lost in their own thoughts while the blizzard wrapped the cabin in white fury, The fire needed constant tending, and they took turns adding logs, checking patches, doing what needed to be done to keep the cold at bay. Near midnight, when the storm showed no sign of weakening, Dale pulled out his wife's Bible. The lamplight caught the careful stitches in its spine as he opened it. "Mind if I read a bit?" he asked. "Helps sometimes, on nights like this." Ellen nodded, settling deeper into her quilts. His voice was steady and low as he read familiar psalms about shelter in times of trouble, about refuge from the storm. The words wove together with the wind's voice, making something new of both. She didn't remember falling asleep, but she woke briefly in the deepest part of the night. The lamp had been turned down, but the stove still glowed red. Dale was awake in his chair, watching over the fire. Like a shepherd, she thought drowsily, keeping watch by night. The thought should have frightened her, being alone in this remote cabin with a man she barely knew. Instead, she felt only gratitude for his quiet vigilance. The storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. Trust, fragile as a bird's egg, had begun to take shape between them. Not romance, they were both too wounded for that, but something equally precious. Understanding. They were two people who had lost everything, now sharing warmth and shelter against winter's worst. Ellen pulled the mended blanket up to her chin, breathing in its familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. Outside, the blizzard howled its ancient song of ice and loneliness. But here, in this small space they'd worked together to secure, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Peace. The blizzard showed no signs of mercy. For 3 days and nights, Bitter Creek vanished beneath endless curtains of white. The world beyond the cabin's walls ceased to exist, replaced by a howling void of wind and ice that demanded every ounce of their strength and attention to survive. On the first night, Ellen couldn't stop shivering. The cold had worked its way deep into her bones, and her feet felt like blocks of ice despite the thick wool socks she wore. She tried to hide her discomfort, but Dale's watchful eyes missed nothing. "Your feet need warming," he said matter-of-factly, moving his chair closer to the hearth. "Frostbite's nothing to trifle with." Ellen hesitated, years of propriety warring with the practical needs of survival. Dale seemed to sense her struggle. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Lost 2 toes to frost because she was too proud to ask for help. Please." The simple sincerity in his voice decided her. Ellen allowed him to help her closer to the fire, where he carefully removed her boots and socks. Her feet were pale as milk, the toes beginning to show the dangerous white patches of early frostbite. Dale worked with gentle efficiency, wrapping her feet in warm cloths he'd heated by the fire. His rough hands moved with surprising tenderness, careful not to press too hard on the cold, numbed flesh. Ellen watched his face as he worked, noting how his brow furrowed in concentration, how his eyes held nothing but concern for her comfort. "Thank you," she whispered, when feeling began to return in painful tingles. He simply nodded, replacing her socks with fresh ones from his own drawer. "We look after each other here," he said. "That's the mountain way." The second day brought new challenges. Their water barrel ran low, and the well outside was buried under feet of snow. The wind still howled like 1,000 wolves, making any journey outside deadly dangerous. "We'll have to melt snow," Dale explained, pulling on his heavy coat. He tied a rope around his waist, securing the other end to the doorframe. "I'll fill these buckets. You keep the fire hot enough to melt it quick." Ellen watched anxiously through the frosted window as Dale battled his way through the storm. The rope stretched taut, guiding him back and forth as he filled bucket after bucket with clean snow. Each time he returned, his beard was crusted with ice, his eyes red from squinting against the wind. Together they worked at the careful process of melting snow for drinking water. Ellen tended the fire while Dale poured the precious liquid through a clean cloth into the barrel. Their hands brushed occasionally as they passed containers back and forth, and Ellen found herself growing accustomed to these small touches, these necessary moments of connection. "You're good at this," Dale commented as she carefully regulated the fire's heat. "Steady hands?" "Had to be," Ellen replied, surprising herself by sharing. "When I was carrying my first baby, I learned to keep the temperature just right. Too hot or too cold, and—" She trailed off, old grief catching in her throat. Dale's hand touched her shoulder briefly, warm through her shawl. "You did everything you could," he said simply. The words, free of pity or judgment, eased something tight in her chest. The third day brought the greatest test of all. The storm's weight bore down on the cabin roof with increasing menace. By midday, the heavy timber beams were groaning under the strain of countless pounds of wet snow. "If it caves in, we'll freeze for sure," Dale said grimly, studying the straining rafters. "Need to brace it somehow." They searched the cabin together, finally finding a sturdy beam in the lean-to storage area. Working in desperate harmony, they maneuvered the heavy timber into position. Ellen held it steady, while Dale secured it with rope and wedges, creating a makeshift support column in the cabin's center. The work left them both exhausted, faces streaked with sweat despite the cold. They slumped down side by side against the cabin wall, shoulders touching, trembling from exertion and the fear of what might have happened. The wind's voice seemed to fill the silence between them, until Dale spoke softly. "Sometimes the Lord breaks us to remake us." The word struck Ellen like a physical blow, releasing something deep inside her. Tears came suddenly, hot and unstoppable. "Then why?" she whispered brokenly. "Why did he leave me barren? What purpose could that serve?" Dale turned to face her, his eyes full of gentle understanding. "Maybe he was waiting for spring," he said softly. Ellen stared at him, seeing in his face all the loss and hope she carried in her own heart. Here was a man who understood grief, who had walked through the valley of shadows and emerged with his compassion intact. Here was someone who saw her not as damaged goods, but as a fellow traveler on a hard road. As the third night deepened around them, the storm began to lose its fury. The wind's howl softened to a moan, then a whisper. In the quiet hours before dawn, gray light began to seep through the frosted windows, bringing with it the promise of clear skies. Ellen and Dale sat together through those final hours of darkness, their hands finding each other in the dim light. His fingers were rough with calluses, hers chapped from work and cold, but they fit together perfectly. Neither spoke. Words seemed unnecessary in the face of this fragile, sacred thing growing between them. The touch was simple, just hands clasped in the gathering dawn, but it held volumes of meaning. It spoke of shared survival, of understanding born in hardship, of two broken people finding wholeness in each other's presence. It was a quiet love, built on respect and trust, rather than passion or desperate need. As the first true light of day edged around the storm's retreat, Ellen felt something shift inside her, like ice breaking up on a spring river. The walls she'd built around her heart, meant to protect her from further pain, began to thaw. In their place grew something new, hope, delicate as the first green shoots after winter. Dale's thumb moved gently across her knuckles, a silent promise of shelter, of acceptance, of a future neither of them had dared to imagine before these 3 days of storm had forced them to truly see each other. Outside, the world was buried in white silence, transformed by the blizzard's fury. Inside, in the warm sanctuary they'd defended together, two souls had found their way to each other through the darkness. Their joined hands in the growing light sealed a bond as pure as the new-fallen snow, as enduring as the mountains themselves. The storm had taken 3 days to reshape the land. In that same time, It had reshaped 2 hearts, breaking them open to the possibility of love, of healing, of beginning again. As dawn painted the cabin's walls with soft light, Ellen and Dale sat in peaceful silence, their clasped hands speaking all that needed to be said. Morning painted the cabin windows with pearl gray light. Ellen woke to find the howling wind had finally surrendered to a profound silence. The kind of silence that only comes after a great storm, when the world holds its breath in wonder at what has changed. She rose from her cot, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and moved to the frosted window. Using her sleeve, she cleared a small circle on the glass. The sight beyond took her breath away. Everything, the yard, the trees, even the fence posts, lay buried under a pristine blanket of white. The familiar landscape had transformed into something magical and new. Dale's quiet footsteps crossed the floor behind her. "Quite a sight," he said softly, joining her at the window. "Reckon it's near 4 feet deep in places." "It's beautiful," Ellen whispered, surprising herself with the warmth in her voice. For the first time since arriving at Bitter Creek, she felt something other than numbness or fear. She felt wonder. "Beautiful, yes," Dale agreed, "but the stock needs tending. Best we dig our way to the barn." He pulled on his heavy coat and handed Ellen his spare. "If you're willing to help?" The coat smelled of pine smoke and leather. Ellen nodded, touched by his constant, careful way of asking rather than demanding. Together they stepped out onto the covered porch, where Dale handed her a wooden snow shovel. The work was hard, but somehow joyful. They took turns breaking trail through the deep snow, trading the lead when one tired. Ellen's muscles protested the unfamiliar labor, but the crisp morning air filled her lungs with energy. When she stumbled, losing her footing in a particularly deep drift, Dale caught her arm. His quiet laugh mingled with her own surprised giggle. "Haven't heard that sound before," he said, helping her regain her balance. Ellen touched her throat, startled by the unfamiliar sensation of laughter. "I haven't had cause to make it in a long while." They worked steadily, the path to the barn gradually taking shape beneath their shovels. The morning sun sparked rainbow colors in the pristine snow, and their breath rose in silver clouds. When they finally reached the barn door, Ellen's cheeks were flushed with effort, and something that felt surprisingly like happiness. Inside, the animals greeted them with eager sounds. While Dale checked the horses and filled water troughs, Ellen scattered feed for the chickens. The familiar tasks felt different somehow, no longer acts of mere survival, but something closer to caring. To belonging. Back in the cabin, Ellen found herself moving toward the stove with purpose. "I could make breakfast," she offered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It would be her first time cooking in this kitchen, her first real claim to this space. Dale looked up from where he was unlacing his snow-covered boots. "I'd like that," he said simply, but his eyes were warm. She found flour, salt pork, and dried apples in the pantry. Soon the cabin filled with the homey smells of frying dough and sizzling meat. Dale sat at the rough-hewn table, mending his trap lines with careful attention while she worked. The quiet between them felt comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. When she set a plate before him, golden fry bread, crisp salt pork, and stewed apples, he thanked her with the same simple sincerity he brought to everything. "Much obliged," he said, waiting for her to sit with her own plate before beginning to eat. The next 2 days settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing. They rose early to tend the animals, working together to keep paths clear as the snow began to settle. Dale showed her how to split wood properly, guiding her hands on the axe handle until she found the right motion. She discovered his shirts needed mending and spent an afternoon by the window, making neat stitches while he worked at his workbench, repairing broken trap chains. Each task shared became a quiet conversation without words. When Ellen needed water for washing, Dale was there to help her carry the heavy bucket. When he struggled with a particularly stubborn trap spring, she held it steady while he made the adjustment. They moved around each other in the cabin's small space, like dancers who had known the steps all their lives. The second evening, Dale bowed his head over their supper of beans and cornbread. "Lord," he began in his quiet way, "thank you for this food, for shelter from the storm, and for—" He paused, then continued softly, "for new beginnings." Ellen found herself bowing her head without thought or hesitation. The prayer settled over her like a warm hand on her shoulder, comfortable and right. When she looked up, she caught Dale watching her with gentle understanding in his eyes. That night, she dreamed of spring flowers pushing through snow, of new life emerging from frozen ground. She woke to find tears on her cheeks, but they weren't the bitter tears she'd grown used to. These felt like rain after drought, like healing. The third day brought warmer air and a sun strong enough to start melting the snow from the cabin's eaves. Ellen spent the morning washing clothes that had gotten wet during their snow shoveling, hanging them near the stove to dry. Dale worked nearby, his strong hands crafting a new handle for a broken tool. As evening approached, she found herself humming softly, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing. The familiar tune filled the cabin with something that felt like peace. Dale looked up from his work, a smile touching his eyes. But he didn't speak, letting the music weave its way through the growing shadows. Later, as she prepared their supper by lamplight, Ellen felt a gentle touch at her temple. Dale stood beside her, his rough fingers carefully brushing a strand of hair back from her face. The touch was as light as a butterfly's wing, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Thank you," he said softly, "for making this place feel like home again." Ellen leaned slightly into his touch, accepting both the gesture and the truth of his words. This cabin on Bitter Creek, which had seemed like a prison just days ago, had transformed into something else entirely. Something that felt remarkably like sanctuary, like hope. The lamplight cast a gentle glow over them both as they stood there, sharing this moment of quiet understanding. Outside, the last of the storm clouds had cleared away, revealing a sky full of stars. The blizzard that had forced them together was gone, but what remained was stronger than any storm. A tender, growing love built on shared work, mutual respect, and the daily choice to be kind. Neither spoke of what was changing between them. Some things were too delicate for words, better expressed through small gestures. A cup of coffee appeared when hands grew cold, a blanket draped over tired shoulders, a smile shared across a quiet room. Their hearts, both scarred by loss, were learning to trust again, one gentle moment at a time. Life at Bitter Creek was settling into new patterns, like the snow settling into the contours of the land. Ellen and Dale moved through their days together, each one bringing fresh discoveries about each other and themselves. Though neither knew it yet, the greatest discovery of all was already taking root, a miracle as quiet as new grass under melting snow, as profound as love itself. Their shared evening prayer that night was simple, just the two of them with bowed heads in the lamplit cabin. But it carried all the weight of gratitude, of healing, of two souls finding their way home through the storm to each other. The morning sun had barely crested the snow-covered pines when the sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the peaceful quiet of Bitter Creek. Ellen was inside the cabin, hanging freshly, dried linens, when she heard the distinct rhythm of multiple horses approaching at a determined pace. Dale set down the leather he was working and moved to the door, his movements deliberate and calm. But Ellen noticed the slight tension in his shoulders as he stepped outside to meet the visitors. Through the cabin's small window, she could see 3 riders approaching through the deep snow, their horses leaving dark trails in the pristine white. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the lead rider. Thomas Webb, her brother-in-law, sat tall in his saddle, his face set in hard lines. Behind him rode the deputy from Cannon City, his tin star catching the morning light, and a hired man Ellen didn't recognize. The sight of them made her stomach clench with dread. "Hail," Thomas called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake oil salesman. "Seems we've got ourselves a situation that needs sorting." Dale stood his ground on the cabin's porch, his voice steady. "State your business." The deputy urged his horse forward, snow crunching beneath the animal's hooves. "We've had a complaint about stolen property, Hale. Best you explain yourself." Ellen's hands trembled as she pressed them against the rough-hewn windowsill. Through the glass, she watched Dale's stance shift slightly, planting his feet more firmly, squaring his shoulders. "No theft here," Dale replied evenly. "Everything at Bitter Creek is mine by right." Thomas's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "That include my sister-in-law? Because last I checked, she was bound by debt to our family. You had no right to take her." "I paid what was asked," Dale said, his voice growing harder. $5 silver and a crate of jerky. Your price, not mine." The hired man spat into the snow. "Ain't legal without proper papers. She's still property until the debt's settled." Ellen felt something snap inside her at those words. Before she could think better of it, she was moving to the door, pushing it open, stepping out into the bitter cold beside Dale. Her whole body trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm no one's property," she declared, though her heart hammered in her chest. Dale's hand found hers, warm and strong, his fingers intertwining with hers in silent support. The deputy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Ma'am, there's laws about debt bondage. Without proper release papers—" "Show me the law," Dale interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who knew his rights. "Show me the legal proof of this supposed debt. Show me the papers that make a free woman into property." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "You know damn well we had an arrangement." "An arrangement isn't law," Dale cut in. "And I won't stand here and let you treat her like a debt slave when there's not a single piece of paper proving she owes anyone anything." The morning air crackled with tension. Ellen could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, feel the warmth of Dale's hand, anchoring her to this moment, to this stand they were taking together. Thomas leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then we'll take her back by force. 3 against 1, Hale. How do you like those odds?" Dale's grip tightened slightly on Ellen's hand, but his voice remained steady. "She's my wife before God," he declared clearly, the words ringing across the snow-covered yard. "And I'll make it legal before man. You want to test those odds? You're welcome to try." The declaration hit Ellen like a physical force. She turned to look at Dale, seeing the absolute conviction in his profile, the unwavering certainty in his stance. The deputy raised a hand, stopping Thomas, who looked ready to dismount. "Hold now. If they're married, we're not leaving without proof," Thomas snarled. "Then fetch the circuit preacher," Dale replied calmly. "Preacher Ames was up at Miller's Creek 2 days ago. Bring him here, and we'll make it official. Then there'll be no more question of ownership or debt." The 3 men exchanged glances, their horses stamping restlessly in the snow. Finally, the deputy nodded. "We'll be back with the preacher. Don't neither of you go anywhere." "We'll be here," Dale assured them, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. They watched as the 3 riders turned their horses, heading back down the snow-covered trail. Only when they disappeared among the trees did Ellen realize she'd been holding her breath. Her legs gave way, and she would have fallen if Dale hadn't caught her, supporting her weight easily. "Come inside," he said gently. "You're freezing." In the cabin's warmth, Ellen's trembling increased until her whole body shook with delayed reaction. Dale guided her to sit by the fire, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders before kneeling in front of her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "So sorry to bring this trouble to your door." "No," Dale said firmly, taking her cold hands in his. "You have nothing to be sorry for. The shame belongs to them, treating a human being like chattel to be bought and sold." The tears came faster now, years of hurt and humiliation pouring out of her. Dale moved to sit beside her, gathering her against his chest as she sobbed. His hand stroked her hair gently, his touch full of tenderness. "Listen to me, Ellen," he said softly when her crying began to quiet. "What I said out there, about making you my wife, I meant every word. But not because they're forcing us, not because of their threats." She lifted her head to look at him, seeing nothing but sincerity in his weathered face. "We'll do this proper," he continued, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Because you deserve honor, because you deserve to be chosen, not bartered for like livestock. Because He paused, swallowing hard. "Because I want to build something real with you. Something true." Fresh tears spilled down Ellen's cheeks, but these were different, warm with something that felt like hope, like healing. "I want that too," she whispered. Dale pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the quiet cabin. "Then we'll stand before God and Preacher Ames, and we'll make our vows proper. Not because they demanded it, but because we choose it, because we choose each other." They sat together by the fire as the morning light grew stronger, held in this moment of decision and certainty. Outside, the snow began to melt in the strengthening sun, dripping from the cabin's eaves like tears of joy. Inside, two hearts beat in shared rhythm, finding in each other the courage to defy injustice, to claim their right to love, to transform a marriage of necessity into one of choice and honor. Dale's arms remained strong around Ellen, his presence steady as a mountain. In his embrace, she felt the shame of her past beginning to melt away, replaced by something stronger, the knowledge that she was worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of being chosen. Tomorrow would bring the preacher and its own challenges, but for now they held each other, finding in their shared strength the power to face whatever came next. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light over them both as they sat wrapped in the quilt, their hands clasped, their hearts united. In this moment of quiet defiance and gentle love, they had already made their most important vows, not with words, but with actions. They had chosen each other, chosen to stand together against injustice, chosen to transform a transaction into a testament of true love's power to heal and redeem. The first pale light of dawn painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of pearl and rose. Ellen stood at the cabin window, watching the eastern sky brighten while her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. The sound of approaching horses made her fingers tighten on the rough windowsill. Dale moved quietly behind her, his presence steady and reassuring. "Remember," he said softly, "this is your choice, no matter what anyone says." She nodded, unable to find her voice as 5 riders appeared through the trees. Thomas and the deputy had returned with the hired man, but this time they were accompanied by Preacher Amos Ames and another man she didn't recognize. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Dale opened the cabin door. Ellen wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and followed him out onto the small porch. The horses' breath steamed in the cold, their hooves crunching in the crystalline snow. Preacher Ames dismounted first, his movements careful on the slippery ground. He was older than Ellen remembered from his rare visits to her family's farm, his beard more gray than brown now, but his eyes held the same gentle wisdom she recalled. "Brother Dale," the preacher said, nodding to her companion. "Sister Ellen." His voice carried warmth, despite the frigid morning. "I understand there's some dispute about your situation here." Before Thomas could interrupt, Dale spoke clearly. "No dispute, preacher. Only a desire to make things right before God and man. I've asked Ellen to be my wife, and we seek your blessing." The preacher's eyes moved to Ellen, studying her face carefully. "Is this true, child? Is this your wish?" Ellen felt the weight of all eyes upon her. Thomas's scowl promised trouble. The deputy watched with professional detachment. But it was Dale's presence beside her that gave her strength. Not demanding, not presuming, just waiting with quiet patience for her true answer. She hesitated, her throat tight with emotion. The word formed slowly, barely a whisper at first. "Yes." "Speak up, girl," Thomas demanded. "Let's hear you say it plain." Ellen lifted her chin, finding her voice. "Yes," she repeated, louder this time. "It's my choice, my wish." Preacher Ames nodded slowly, satisfaction crossing his weathered features. "Then let's proceed inside, out of this cold. A marriage ceremony deserves proper dignity, however humble the setting." Dale held the door for them all. Ellen moved quickly to light the oil lamp, and their one precious candle, its warm glow softening the cabin's rustic interior. The preacher removed his heavy coat and withdrew a small Bible from his saddlebag, its leather cover worn smooth by years of use. Thomas and the others crowded near the door, creating an uncomfortable audience. The deputy removed his hat, at least showing respect for the ceremony. The hired man followed suit, though Thomas kept his on until the deputy elbowed him. "Join hands," Preacher Ames instructed, opening his Bible. Ellen turned to face Dale, her heart thundering in her chest. His hands were warm as they enfolded hers, rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. She looked up into his eyes and found them filled with such tenderness that tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. The preacher's voice filled the small cabin, speaking of love's patient kindness, of bonds stronger than death, of two becoming one flesh. Outside, snow still glittered on the cabin's roof, catching the strengthening morning light. Inside, the candle's flame danced, casting moving shadows on the log walls. "Dale Hale," the preacher said, "do you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife? To love, honor, and cherish her, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Dale answered, his voice steady and sure. "Ellen Ward, do you take this man to be your lawful wedded husband? To love, honor, and cherish him, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others, as long as you both shall live?" Ellen's voice trembled but held firm. "I do." "The rings, if you have them?" Dale reached into his pocket and withdrew 2 simple gold bands. Ellen's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't known he possessed them. Later she would learn they had belonged to his parents, carried all these years as precious mementos. They exchanged the rings with trembling fingers, each one sliding home as if destined to rest there. The metal was cold at first, but quickly warmed against their skin. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder," Preacher Ames declared. Then he smiled, adding softly, "Remember always, with God, nothing shall be impossible." The words settled over Ellen like a blessing, reaching deep into her heart where old wounds still ached. She felt something shift inside her, as if a door long locked had finally opened. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said. Dale's hand rose to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. Ellen closed her eyes as he leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle as a prayer. In that moment, she felt truly chosen, truly cherished, for the first time in her life. When they separated, she saw Thomas and the others already moving toward the door, their presence no longer holding any power over her. The deputy paused long enough to offer a quick "congratulations" before following them out. Preacher Ames lingered a moment longer, closing his Bible with care. "I'll file the marriage certificate in Cannon City," he said. "Everything's proper and legal now." He smiled at them both. "May God bless your union with joy, peace, and perhaps even miracles." Dale walked the preacher to his horse, speaking quietly with him while Ellen remained in the doorway. She watched them shake hands, saw the preacher mount up and ride away with the others. Soon, the only sound was the soft drip of melting snow from the eaves and the distant cry of a mountain jay. When Dale returned to her, they stood together in the doorway, watching until the last rider disappeared among the trees. Without speaking, they moved back inside the cabin, closing the door on the world beyond. They knelt together before the hearth, where the morning fire had burned low. Dale added another log, and they watched the flames catch, spreading warmth through the room. Ellen felt his arm slip around her waist, drawing her closer. "Wife," he whispered, testing the word. "Husband," she answered, the term feeling new and precious on her tongue. Their second kiss was slower than the first, deeper, more searching. It held all the reverence of their vows but carried something more, a growing warmth, a tender passion, a promise of things to come. When they parted, Ellen rested her head against Dale's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. They spent the day in quiet celebration, sharing simple meals and speaking of small dreams, a garden in spring, perhaps some chickens, the way the cabin might grow along with their love. As evening approached, Dale read from the Bible by candlelight, his voice warm and sure as he shared passages about love's endurance, about hope that never fails. Night fell early, as it always did in the mountains. The fire burned low again, casting a gentle glow through the cabin. Ellen's hands shook slightly as she readied herself for bed, but when Dale drew her into his arms, she found no fear there, only trust, only love. Their first joining was gentle as falling snow, more thanksgiving than passion. Dale's touches were reverent, careful, asking permission with every caress. Ellen discovered that her body remembered how to love, even after years of believing herself broken. Together they learned the geography of their new union, mapping each other's hearts as surely as their flesh. Afterward, they lay tangled in quilts and each other's arms, the fire's dying embers painting everything in soft gold. Ellen traced the scar on Dale's shoulder, a silver line in the darkness, while he pressed tender kisses to her temple. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making me feel chosen, cherished." His arms tightened around her. "You are cherished. You always will be." Outside, an owl called softly to its mate. Inside, two hearts beat in perfect rhythm, their love sanctified by vows and consummated in the sight of heaven. Ellen drifted toward sleep, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. Her last conscious thought was of the preacher's words. With God, nothing shall be impossible. Dale's breathing deepened beside her, his body warm and solid against hers. The cabin creaked gently in the night wind, a sound that no longer spoke of loneliness, but of home. Together they slept, wrapped in the certainty of their love, while the stars wheeled overhead, and the mountain kept its ancient watch. Their marriage had begun as a necessity, a shield against those who would treat a human soul as property. But in the sacred space of their vows, in the tender consummation of their union, it had transformed into something far more precious, a testament to love's power to heal, to restore, to make all things new again. 3 days after their wedding, the peaceful rhythm of their new life shattered like ice. The sound of approaching horses made Dale spring to his feet during breakfast. Ellen's heart clenched as she recognized her brother-in-law's voice calling from outside. "Got a warrant here, Hale. Come on out." Dale moved swiftly, his expression grim. "Get your warmest clothes," he whispered to Ellen. "We need to leave, now." Ellen's hands trembled as she grabbed her shawl and wool coat. Dale was already pulling supplies from shelves, bags of flour, dried meat, matches. He thrust a stack of blankets into her arms while he checked his rifle and gathered ammunition. "The back window," he murmured. "Quick and quiet while I keep them talking." Dale's voice carried through the door. "Give me a minute to get decent." He winked at Ellen, trying to keep her calm as he helped her through the window. The snow crunched beneath her feet as she crept toward the barn. Inside, she found their horses already saddled. Dale had prepared for this possibility. Her mare nickered softly as Ellen secured the blankets and supplies. Minutes later, Dale slipped in through the back of the barn, carrying his rifle and more provisions. "They're getting impatient," he whispered, quickly tying down the last of their goods. "We'll head north through the pine forest. The snow will cover our tracks." Ellen nodded, fighting back tears as Dale helped her mount. This cabin had become her first true home, and now they were leaving it behind. But as Dale swung up onto his horse beside her, she realized home wasn't the walls and roof. It was him. They led the horses quietly out the barn's back door, keeping the building between them and the men out front. The moment they cleared the corner, Dale spurred his horse forward. Ellen followed, pressing close behind him as they plunged into the forest. Shouts erupted behind them. The thunder of pursuing hoofbeats sent fear shooting through Ellen's chest. But Dale knew these woods better than any man alive. He led them through dense stands of pine where branches whipped at their faces, across shallow streams where the horses' hooves broke through thin ice, and up steep ridges that left their mounts breathing hard. The snow made the going treacherous. Deep drifts forced them to pick their way carefully, and more than once Ellen's horse stumbled. Each time, Dale waited patiently until she regained control. His calm presence helped steady her nerves as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. By mid-morning, the sounds of pursuit had faded. Still, Dale kept them moving, following game trails and creek beds where their tracks would be harder to spot. The winter sun climbed higher, but offered little warmth. Ellen's toes and fingers grew numb despite her layers of clothing. "You doing all right?" Dale called back to her during a brief rest. "Yes," she answered, though her teeth chattered. "I'm just grateful you knew this might happen." He reached across the space between their horses to squeeze her hand. "I've learned to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. We'll find shelter before nightfall." They rode on through the afternoon, stopping only to let the horses drink from a half-frozen stream. Ellen's body ached from hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. The freedom to be with Dale was worth any discomfort. As the day waned, snow began falling again, fat, lazy flakes that further obscured their trail. Dale led them into a grove of massive fir trees where the ground was relatively clear of snow. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "The branches will give us cover, and we can keep a fire small enough not to be seen from a distance." They worked together with practiced efficiency, falling into the rhythm they'd developed during the blizzard. Dale gathered firewood while Ellen cleared a space beneath the largest fir. They laid out blankets and set up a makeshift camp, taking turns watching the flames while the other rested. The night was long and cold. Every snapping twig made Ellen start, fearing pursuit. But Dale's presence beside her was solid and reassuring. He kept his rifle close, but spent more time watching her than the darkness beyond their fire. "Try to sleep," he urged, wrapping an extra blanket around her shoulders. "I'll keep first watch." Ellen wanted to protest, but exhaustion won out. She drifted off to the sound of Dale's quiet humming and the gentle pop of burning wood. When he woke her for her turn at watch, the moon had risen, casting silver light through the fir branches. She sat with her back against the tree trunk, listening to the night sounds of the forest while Dale slept. Despite their circumstances, a strange peace settled over her. They were together, and that was what mattered most. Dawn broke clear and cold. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack, then mounted up to continue their journey. Dale seemed more relaxed now, confident they'd put enough distance between themselves and their pursuers. "There's an old trapper's cabin up ahead," he told her as they rode. "Built it years ago with some other men before I settled on Bitter Creek. If it's still standing, it'll give us shelter until spring." The cabin revealed itself near midday, tucked against a hillside above a frozen creek. It was smaller than their home on Bitter Creek, and years of weather had taken their toll, but the roof was sound, and the walls still stood strong. "Thank the Lord," Dale breathed as they dismounted. "It's better than I hoped." They spent the rest of the day making the cabin livable. Dale repaired a broken window shutter while Ellen swept years of dust and leaves from the floor. They hung the furs they'd brought to block drafts, set traps for fresh meat, and boiled snow for drinking water. By evening, the cabin felt almost homey. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and the smell of coffee mixed with the pine scent of the walls. Ellen stirred a pot of stew, made from their precious supplies, while Dale cleaned his rifle nearby. The simple domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly. How quickly they'd adapted to this new situation, how natural it felt to work together. A wave of dizziness washed over her as she stood stirring the stew. She gripped the edge of the hearth, trying to steady herself. "Ellen?" Dale was beside her instantly, his strong hands supporting her. "What's wrong?" "Just tired," she murmured, but her legs felt weak beneath her. "The long ride, I suppose." "That's more than enough work for today," he said firmly. Without another word, he scooped her into his arms and carried her to their makeshift bed of blankets and furs. Ellen wanted to protest that she was fine, that the stew needed finishing, but the room was spinning gently. She felt Dale pull a blanket over her as he knelt beside their bed. "Lord," he prayed softly, his hand warm on her forehead, "watch over my wife tonight. Guard her rest and restore her strength. Whatever may come, help us face it together." His voice followed Ellen down into sleep, a gentle anchor in the darkness. Through her drowsiness, she felt him lie down beside her, his arm protective around her waist. The sober fire crackled softly, and outside an owl called into the night. Their new life might be harder than before, but they were together. As Ellen drifted deeper into sleep, she knew that was all that mattered. They would face whatever came next, as they had faced everything else, side by side, their love stronger than any warrant or wilderness. Dale kept watch long into the night, listening to his wife's steady breathing and the wind in the pines. Tomorrow they would set more traps, explore their surroundings, and begin to build a new life in this hidden valley. For now he was content to hold Ellen close, thanking God for the precious gift of her presence beside him. Ellen sat at the rough-hewn table, her hands trembling as she tried to thread a needle. The morning light streaming through the cabin window seemed too bright, making her head spin. A week had passed since their escape to this hidden valley, but her weakness persisted. Simple tasks left her breathless, and the smell of cooking food often turned her stomach. Dale watched her from across the cabin, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd noticed how she'd grown pale, how she needed to rest more frequently between chores. When the needle slipped from her fingers for the third time, he crossed the room in 3 long strides. "That's enough," he said quietly, placing his calloused hand over hers. "We're riding to the Ute settlement today." Ellen started to protest. "I'm fine, Dale. Just tired from all the changes." "No," he cut in, gentle but firm. "Something ain't right, and I won't risk your health up here alone. Mother Aponi's known for her healing ways. The settlement's only half a day's ride." The tenderness in his voice made her throat tighten. She'd never had someone watch over her so carefully before. "What if the law finds us there?" Dale shook his head. "The Ute keep their own counsel. They won't betray us to town folk." He squeezed her hand. Please, Ellen, for my peace of mind, if nothing else." She nodded slowly, knowing he was right. The weakness had gone on too long to ignore. They set out mid-morning, after Dale had carefully banked the cabin's fire. The spring thaw had begun, turning the snow treacherous. Their horses picked their way carefully through patches of mud and ice, hooves crunching through partially frozen crust. Ellen rode behind Dale, watching his broad shoulders as he guided them through the wilderness. The journey took them higher into the mountains, where ancient pines stood sentinel against the sky. Melting snow dripped from branches, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Ellen's mare stumbled slightly on a rocky slope, and Dale immediately reined in his horse. "You all right?" he called back. "Yes," she assured him, though her head swam a little from the altitude. "How much further?" "Not far now. See that smoke rising beyond that ridge? That's their winter camp." As they crested the hill, Ellen saw the settlement spread out below them. Several sturdy lodges stood in a protected valley, with smoke rising from their peaks. Children played between the structures, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked at cooking fires or stretched hides on frames, while men mended tools and tended to horses. Dale led them down the slope at an easy pace. As they approached, several people looked up, but no one seemed alarmed by their presence. An elderly man nodded to Dale in recognition, and Dale returned the gesture respectfully. "Mother Aponi's lodge is that one," Dale said softly, pointing to a well-maintained structure near a small stream. "She's known to all around here, helps both settlers and Ute alike." They dismounted, and Dale helped Ellen stand when her legs wobbled beneath her. A woman emerged from the lodge. Mother Aponi, Ellen realized. She was small but straight-backed, despite her advanced years, with deep lines of wisdom etched in her brown face. Her dark eyes were sharp and knowing as she looked them over. "Dale Hale," she said in clear English. "It has been many moons since you brought furs to trade." Her gaze shifted to Ellen. "And now you bring your wife." "Mother Aponi," Dale said respectfully, removing his hat. "My wife Ellen needs your wisdom. She's been weak, dizzy." The old woman's eyes hadn't left Ellen's face. "Come inside, daughter," she said, gesturing to the lodge entrance. "Your man can wait with the horses." Inside the lodge, warm and fragrant with herbs, Mother Aponi had Ellen lie down on a soft bed of furs. Her gnarled hands were gentle but sure as she pressed carefully on Ellen's belly, asked questions about her monthly cycles, and checked her eyes and tongue. All the while, she hummed softly, a sound that reminded Ellen of her own grandmother's lullabies. Finally, Mother Aponi sat back on her heels, a knowing smile spreading across her weathered face. "The Great Spirit has blessed your womb, daughter. New life grows within you." Ellen's world tilted. "What?" she whispered, her hand flying to her stomach. "But I can't. I'm barren. My family said—" "Your family was wrong," Mother Aponi said firmly. "The child is there, small as a pine nut but strong. I have helped bring many babies into this world. I do not mistake such signs." Tears spilled down Ellen's cheeks as the truth sank in. After years of loss and shame, after being sold off as worthless, a miracle was growing inside her. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Mother Aponi patted her shoulder. "Shall I call your man?" Ellen nodded, unable to speak. She heard the lodge flap move, followed by Dale's heavy steps. Then his familiar presence was beside her, his hand finding hers. "Ellen?" The worry in his voice made her heart swell. Mother Aponi spoke clearly. "Your wife carries a child, Dale Hale. The sickness and weakness are natural signs of early pregnancy." Ellen uncovered her face to see Dale standing speechless, his hat crushed in his hands, eyes wide with wonder and disbelief. The expression on his face hope and joy and terror all mixed together, brought fresh tears to her eyes. Mother Aponi moved around her lodge, gathering items into a small leather pouch. "Here, herbs for the sickness, to be made into tea. Come back when the moon is full again, and I will check on the little one's progress." She pressed the pouch into Dale's hands. "The Great Spirit has blessed this union. Now go, make camp nearby and rest. The journey has tired the mother-to-be." They thanked her, Dale's voice rough with emotion. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent behind the mountains. Dale helped Ellen mount her horse, his hands lingering protectively at her waist. They made camp in a sheltered spot not far from the settlement, close enough to see the lodge smoke, but far enough for privacy. Dale insisted on doing all the work, gathering wood, starting the fire, laying out their bedrolls. Ellen sat wrapped in a blanket, one hand resting on her stomach, still stunned by the day's revelation. The stars emerged one by one as darkness fell, brilliant and close in the mountain air. Dale sat beside her at the fire, neither of them having spoken much since leaving Mother Aponi's lodge. The flames cast flickering shadows on their faces as they tried to absorb the magnitude of what they'd learned. Finally, Ellen whispered into the night, "I thought my body was dead. Useless. That's what they always told me." Dale's arm went around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It was just waiting for love," he said softly. "Waiting for the right time. For us." She turned her face into his chest, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and pine. His hand covered hers where it rested on her stomach, and they sat in reverent silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Neither felt the need to sleep, too full of wonder at the miracle they'd been given. As the night deepened, Dale prayed quietly, his voice mixing with the crackle of the fire. "Lord, we ain't worthy of such blessing, but we thank you with all our hearts. Watch over this child, this precious gift. Help us be the parents it deserves." Ellen echoed his "Amen," feeling truly blessed for the first time in years. They held each other until the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, their hearts too full for sleep. The child within her, their child, was proof that God hadn't forgotten them after all. Love had brought new life to what seemed barren, had transformed their suffering into joy. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-capped peaks in pink and gold, Ellen felt Dale's lips press against her temple. They would face whatever came next together. Not just the two of them now, but three. The thought filled her with both terror and sublime happiness. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine and melting snow, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark began to sing. The first signs of spring came gradually to the high country. Patches of bare ground emerged from melting snow like islands in a white sea. The creek ice thinned and cracked, releasing musical trickles of water beneath. Dale and Ellen watched nature's slow awakening from their hidden cabin, marking each change with quiet joy. One mild morning in early April, Dale stood at the cabin door, scanning the awakening forest. "Reckon it's time to set some beaver traps," he said, shouldering his gear. "The pelts'll fetch good prices come trading season." Ellen paused in her mending, concern crossing her face. "Be careful out there." "Always am." He kissed her forehead, then bent to kiss her growing belly. "You two rest easy while I'm gone." She watched from the doorway as he disappeared into the trees, his familiar figure getting smaller until the forest swallowed him whole. Her hand drifted to the slight swell beneath her dress. Barely visible yet, but definitely there. The morning sickness had eased, replaced by a deep, contented tiredness that Mother Aponi assured her was normal. While Dale was gone, Ellen explored the area near the cabin. She found a promising spot for a garden, a south-facing patch of earth near the creek where the snow had already melted. The soil felt rich between her fingers, dark and crumbly. She marked the boundaries with sticks, already imagining rows of beans and carrots. Dale returned at dusk with 2 beaver pelts and a spring turkey. "Found your garden spot," he said as he cleaned the turkey. "Good choice. Soil will warm up quick there." "Think it's safe to plant so early?" Ellen asked, setting out plates for supper. "We'll watch the weather." He glanced up from his work. "But it's good to have hope in something growing." The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Dale checked his trap lines at dawn, ranging further as the snow retreated. He brought home beaver, muskrat, and occasionally elk meat. Ellen prepared the pelts, scraping and stretching them carefully as he'd taught her. Her fingers grew skilled at the work, finding satisfaction in transforming raw hides into valuable furs. Between pelt preparation, she worked on the garden. Dale helped her clear the plot and build a simple fence to keep deer out. They planted hardy vegetables first: potatoes, onions, and peas. Ellen visited the patch each morning, watching for the first green shoots to break through the dark soil. One evening, Dale came home with more than just pelts. "Met Jim Carson on the trap line today," he said, pulling letters from his coat. "He brought news from town." Ellen's hands trembled as she took the papers. The first was from Preacher Ames, full of prayers and encouragement. The second made her blood run cold, a warning from a friend that her brother-in-law still sought revenge, claiming Dale had stolen both property and family honor. "He won't let it rest," she whispered, sinking into a chair. Dale knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "We'll face it when we must. But not today. Today we're safe, we're together, and we're blessed." He touched her growing belly gently. "That's all that matters right now." Ellen nodded, drawing strength from his steadiness. That night, they read aloud the verse Preacher Ames had given them at their wedding: "With God nothing shall be impossible." The words felt more true with each passing day. As May warmed the mountains, Dale began working on a special project. Ellen would hear him in the evenings, whittling and measuring behind the cabin. When she tried to peek, he shooed her away with a mysterious smile. Finally, one morning, he led her outside to reveal his creation: a cradle crafted from sturdy willow branches he'd gathered along the creek. "Oh, Dale," Ellen breathed, running her hands over the smooth wood. He'd woven the branches in an intricate pattern, creating a sturdy basket that would rock gently on its curved base. "Needs a mattress still," he said gruffly, but his eyes shone with pride. "Thought you might stuff one with cattail down, softer than feathers." Ellen hugged him, pressing her face into his chest to hide her tears. Every day, his quiet ways of showing love healed another crack in her heart. They hung the cradle from the cabin's main beam, where it would catch the morning light. Ellen found herself pausing often to touch it, marveling at how something so simple could hold such promise. The garden flourished as June arrived, bringing warmer days and afternoon thunderstorms. Pea vines climbed their poles, potato plants spread their leaves, and tender lettuce sprouted in neat rows. Ellen spent hours there, weeding and watering, singing old hymns to her growing child. Dale watched her from the cabin one morning, smiling at how she glowed in the early light. He'd been working on another surprise: a small wooden cross, carved from pine and polished smooth. That evening, he hung it by the window where the setting sun would catch it. Ellen touched it gently. "It's beautiful." "Thought we could use a reminder," Dale said softly. "Of who brought us together, who blessed us with this miracle." He placed his hand on her belly, which now curved noticeably beneath her dress. They'd taken to sitting outside after supper, watching darkness gather in the valley. This evening was especially fine, warm and still, with the first fireflies of the season rising from the creek bank. Their tiny lights danced over the water like earthbound stars. "Look," Ellen whispered, pointing to where two fireflies spiraled together, their lights blinking in what seemed like perfect harmony. Like they're dancing, Dale chuckled, a rare and wonderful sound. Reckon they are, at that. Ellen's laugh joined his, bright and clear in the gathering dusk. The sound echoed softly into the pines, then faded into the peaceful night. She leaned back against Dale's chest, his arms wrapping around her and their unborn child. The creek murmured its endless song. Crickets chirped in the grass, and more. Fireflies rose to join the dance. In that moment, Ellen felt complete. Despite the threats that still lingered in the world below their mountain sanctuary, she knew this was where she belonged. Here, love had transformed her from unwanted property into a cherished wife and mother-to-be. Here, faith bloomed like her garden, nourished by daily acts of devotion and care. Dale's hand found hers in the darkness. Together they watched the fireflies paint their light poems across the night, each flash a reminder of God's endless capacity for creating beauty from darkness. The wooden cross in their window would catch tomorrow's sunrise, marking another day of their shared journey toward whatever lay ahead. For now, they had this moment, the warm June night, the dancing fireflies, the gentle movement of new life beneath their joined hands. It was more than enough. It was everything. The late August sun beat down on Ellen and Dale as they loaded the borrowed wagon. Their friendly neighbor, Rancher Thompson, had insisted they take his sturdy vehicle for the journey back to Cannon City. "Ain't right for a woman in your condition to ride horseback that far," he'd said, pushing his hat back and squinting at Ellen's prominent belly. Dale secured the last rope over their meager possessions, some furs, tools, and the willow cradle he'd made. Ellen stood in the shade of a pine tree, one hand resting on her stomach. At 7 months along, the child moved constantly now, especially in the cool mornings. "You certain about this?" Dale asked softly, coming to stand beside her. Ellen nodded. "We can't hide forever. The baby deserves better than being born in shadows." They set out at dawn the next day. The wagon creaked and swayed as it descended from their mountain sanctuary. Ellen sat beside Dale on the wooden seat, a quilt padding the rough boards. She watched their cabin grow smaller until the trees swallowed it completely. The first day's travel was slow but steady. Dale kept to the old mining roads where possible, choosing the smoothest path for Ellen's sake. They stopped often to rest and water the horses. At midday, they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack beneath a towering cottonwood. "Preacher Ames's last letter said he'd help us," Ellen said, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Said he's been speaking to folks about us." Dale nodded, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Good man, the preacher. Reckon we'll need all the friends we can get." They made camp that night in a sheltered valley, the wagon positioned to block the wind. Dale built a small fire and heated beans and coffee. The familiar smell reminded Ellen of their first nights together in his cabin, when she'd been too proud and frightened to eat in his presence. Now she sat close beside him, sharing his tin cup, their shoulders touching in the gathering dark. The second day brought them down from the foothills into more settled country. They passed scattered homesteads and grazing cattle. Ellen noticed how Dale sat straighter, more alert, his rifle close at hand. But no trouble found them on the dusty road. By mid-afternoon, Cannon City's church steeple came into view. Ellen's heart beat faster at the sight. This place held so many memories, most of them painful. Yet something had changed. She was no longer the broken woman who'd been sold for $5 in jerky. She carried new life within her, and Dale's quiet strength beside her. The town had grown in their absence. New buildings lined the main street, and more people crowded the wooden sidewalks. As Dale guided the wagon down the rutted road, heads turned. Conversations stopped. Ellen felt the weight of their stares. "Just keep your head high," Dale murmured. "You've nothing to be ashamed of." They hadn't gone far when a familiar figure stepped into the street. Preacher Amos Ames stood before them, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. Dale drew the wagon to a halt. "Welcome home, children," the preacher called out, approaching Ellen's side of the wagon. His eyes grew wide at the sight of her condition. "Why, Ellen Ward, or should I say Ellen Hale, you're absolutely blooming." Ellen felt tears spring to her eyes as the old man reached up to clasp her hand. His grip was warm and firm, full of acceptance. "The Lord has blessed you indeed," he said, his voice carrying clearly to the gathering onlookers. "A mountain miracle, if ever I saw one." Dale climbed down from the wagon and shook the preacher's hand. They spoke quietly for a moment. Then Ames gestured towards the church. "I've got a place fixed up for you out back. Nothing fancy, mind you, but it's solid and dry. Should do until you get properly settled." The small shack behind the church was indeed humble, just 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen. But it was clean, and someone had left fresh straw in the mattress and flowers in a tin can on the windowsill. Ellen recognized Mother Aponi's touch in the bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. "The old Ute woman came down special to prepare it," Ames explained. "Said she's watching over you both." They unloaded the wagon as the sun began to set. Dale hung the wooden cross in their new bedroom window, just as it had hung in the cabin. Ellen arranged their few belongings, making the spare space feel more like home. The willow cradle found a place of honor near their bed. That evening, Dale walked into town to inquire about work. He returned with good news. The sawmill needed strong backs for hauling timber, and they didn't ask questions about a man's past. The pay wasn't much, but it would keep food on their table and a roof over their heads. "Proper work for a proper life," he said, washing up for supper. "No more hiding in the hills." Ellen served their simple meal on the preacher's loaned dishes. Through the open window she could hear the town settling into night, doors closing, dogs barking, the saloon's piano playing distantly. It felt strange after so many months of mountain silence. Later, as Dale slept beside her, Ellen sat up writing by candlelight. The letter to her mother had been forming in her mind for weeks. Now the words flowed onto the page. "Dear Mother, I write to you not in anger or blame, but in hope of peace. God has blessed me beyond measure. The child I carry is proof that His mercy reaches even those deemed barren and worthless. Dale is a good man who sees me as God does, worthy of love and respect. I pray that you might find it in your heart to know us as we truly are, not as others have painted us." She wrote until the candle burned low, pouring out her heart. Whether her mother would read the letter or burn it unread, Ellen couldn't know. But the writing itself felt like a step toward healing. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Dale left each morning before dawn for the sawmill, returning at dusk with sawdust in his hair and splinters in his hands. Ellen kept their small home, traded with neighbors, and helped the preacher's wife mend church linens. Her belly grew larger, and women who had once shunned her now stopped to offer advice about birthing and babies. The autumn wind brought changes to Cannon City. New settlers arrived daily, and the town buzzed with talk of silver strikes in the mountains. The air smelled of cedar smoke and frost, with an underlying current of promise. Ellen felt it too, the possibility of a fresh start, of finding their place in this growing community. Yet she never forgot the threats that had driven them into hiding. Her brother-in-law's face still haunted her dreams sometimes. Each day that passed without trouble was a blessing, but Dale remained watchful. He kept his rifle clean and close, even as he built a life of honest labor. "We'll face whatever comes," he told her one evening as they sat in their doorway, watching the sunset paint the church steeple gold. "Together, with faith and truth on our side." Ellen leaned against his shoulder, feeling their child move within her. The town's sounds washed over them: wagon wheels, children's laughter, the distant whistle of a train. Here they were, no longer hiding but not fully free, waiting to see if love and courage could overcome the shadows of the past. The autumn wind rustled the leaves of the cottonwood tree shading their small home. Ellen breathed deeply of the cedar-scented air, one hand holding Dale's work-roughened fingers, the other cradling their growing miracle. For now, this moment of peace was enough. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. The knock came just as Ellen was sweeping frost from the front step. 3 deputies stood in the pale morning light, their badges catching the sun. Behind them loomed her brother-in-law, his face tight with vindictive triumph. "Mrs. Hale," Sheriff Pike said, removing his hat. His weathered face showed clear discomfort. "I've got papers here from the territorial court." Dale appeared in the doorway, one hand resting protectively on Ellen's shoulder. "What's this about, Sheriff?" The sheriff unfolded an official document. "Complaint filed by Mr. Ward here. Claims you bewitched his sister-in-law, making the marriage void. Says you abducted her and committed fraud." "That's a lie!" Ellen's voice shook with anger. Her hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sheriff Pike said quietly. "Law says I got to bring him in. Trial's set for 2 weeks from today." Dale squeezed Ellen's shoulder before stepping forward, head held high. "No need for change, Sheriff. I'll come peaceful." As they led Dale away, Preacher Ames hurried up the street. "I saw them coming," he said, putting an arm around Ellen. "Don't fear, child. Mother Apony and I will stand with you both." That evening, alone in their small home, Ellen knelt by the cold hearth. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength to face what's coming." Her prayers mingled with her tears as the first snow of the season began falling outside, soft and steady, just like that storm months ago that had brought her and Dale together. Through the window, white flakes drifted down in the gathering darkness, covering Cannon City in a familiar blanket of silence. The days after Dale's arrest dragged like molasses in winter. Each afternoon, Ellen made her way to the small jailhouse, carrying fresh-baked bread and carefully chosen Bible passages. The worn floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she settled onto a wooden stool outside his cell. "You need your rest," Dale would say, his gentle eyes concerned. "Think of the baby." But Ellen shook her head, firm as mountain stone. "We face this together." Around town, whispers followed her like autumn leaves. Some folks crossed the street when they saw her coming, while others offered secret smiles of support. The truth hung somewhere between scandal and miracle. One evening, as sunset painted the church windows amber, Ellen stood before the congregation. Her hands trembled, but her voice rang clear as she shared their story. She spoke of that bitter night when Dale first offered her his blanket, of prayers whispered through cabin walls, and of God's love blooming in a blizzard's heart. "The Lord moved in that storm," she testified, melting 2 frozen hearts into one. Silence filled the chapel like morning fog. Here and there, handkerchiefs dabbed at eyes. Preacher Ames stepped forward, laying weathered hands upon her shoulders. "Lord," he prayed, his voice deep as thunder, "let truth shine bright as dawn." Walking home under starlight, Ellen felt the first sharp pain, then another. Her hands clutched her belly as fear gripped her heart. The baby wasn't due for weeks. She sent the preacher's boy running 2 directions, one to fetch Dr. Mills, the other to find Mother Apony in the Ute settlement. Snow fell thick as wool blankets when Ellen woke. Each breath brought fresh waves of pain, but she set her jaw firm. "I must go," she told Mother Apony, who'd stayed through the night. "Dale needs me there." The courthouse buzzed like a stirred beehive when Preacher Ames helped her inside. Every bench creaked with townsfolk, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Ellen's brother-in-law stood at the front, face red as a summer apple. "She was my property by right," he shouted, pointing a finger. "This trapper bewitched her." Dale sat straight-backed, his hands folded calm as still water. When the judge asked him to speak, he simply opened the worn Bible and read, "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Ellen's turn came next. She gripped the witness stand, her voice steady despite the pain. "I was sold for $5 silver in dried meat," she began. The room fell silent as fresh snow as she told of the storm that brought them together, of prayers through cabin walls, of marriage blessed by God's own hand. The judge frowned, fingers drumming his desk. Law wrestled with mercy in his eyes. Suddenly, Ellen gasped. Warm wetness soaked her skirts as pain knifed through her middle. The room erupted in chaos as she swayed, Preacher Ames catching her before she fell. "Get Dr. Mills," the judge thundered, his gavel forgotten. "Clear the court." Within moments, the courthouse transformed. Women swept forward with blankets while men carried benches aside. Mother Apony knelt beside Ellen, her weathered hands steady and sure. Dr. Mills burst through the door, snow dusting his coat, medical bag clutched tight. "The baby comes now," Mother Apony announced, her voice carrying authority that silenced the whispers. Dale strained against his handcuffs, eyes fixed on Ellen. "Please," he whispered to Sheriff Pike. The lawman hesitated, then pulled out his keys. The gentle click of opening cuffs echoed through the hall. Ellen gripped Dale's calloused hand as pain racked her body. Hours passed like water over stone. Mother Apony murmured encouragement, while Dr. Mills nodded approval at their shared work. Townsfolk stood against the walls, heads bowed in prayer. Then, piercing the tension like dawn breaking night, a baby's cry rang out. Pure silence fell, broken only by soft weeping from the crowd. Ellen's tears mixed with joy as she cradled their son, his face pink as wild roses. "He's ours," she whispered, voice trembling. "And God's." The judge stood, wiping his eyes. "This court sees divine providence at work today. All charges against Dale Hale are dismissed." His gavel struck once, final as thunder. Throughout the courthouse, people dropped to their knees. Prayers rose like smoke from 100 hearts. Even Ellen's brother-in-law stood silent, hat crushed in his hands, witness to the miracle none could deny. The last patches of winter snow melted from the valley floor as Dale guided their wagon along the familiar trail to Bitter Creek. Ellen sat beside him, cradling their 2-week-old son, Samuel, beneath layers of thick quilts. The infant's peaceful breathing matched the gentle creaking of wagon wheels over thawing ground. "Almost home," Dale said softly, his eyes warm as he glanced at his family. The word family still felt like a miracle on his tongue. The cabin came into view through bare branches. Winter's fury had left its mark. Loose shingles rattled in the breeze, and the rail fence lay broken in places where heavy snow had crushed it. But the sight of it made Ellen's heart swell. This was where their love had first bloomed, where God had blessed their union. Dale helped Ellen down from the wagon, one arm steady around her waist while she clutched Samuel close. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and winter dust. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as they moved through the familiar space. Ellen's fingers traced the rough-hewn table where they had shared their first meal together. "It needs a woman's touch again," she said, smiling as she settled into the rocking chair Dale had carved during her pregnancy. "Reckon it needs more than that," Dale replied, surveying the room. "But we'll make it right, bit by bit." Over the next few days, they fell into a gentle rhythm. Dale rose at dawn to repair the fence, the steady ring of his hammer mixing with bird song. Ellen tended to Samuel, and began bringing order back to their home, singing hymns as she worked. When the baby slept, she swept winter's debris from corners and hung fresh curtains she had sewn during their time in town. One clear morning, Dale came in from his work to find Ellen at the table, pen in hand, tears dropping onto paper. "Writing to your folks?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "They deserve to know their grandson, even if—" Her voice trailed off. Dale's hand squeezed her shoulder. "The Lord knows your heart, Ellen. That's what matters." The letter took shape slowly, each word carefully chosen. Ellen wrote of forgiveness, of God's mysterious ways, of the joy their son brought. She described his tiny fingers and the way he smiled in his sleep. When finished, she sealed it with a prayer, knowing in her heart she might never receive an answer. As spring crept higher into the mountains, they prepared the soil for planting. Dale turned over the earth while Ellen worked beside him, Samuel sleeping nearby in a basket padded with quilts. They planted potatoes, beans, and hardy greens, enough to see them through the next winter. "Remember when you first brought me here?" Ellen asked one afternoon as they worked. "I was so afraid." Dale paused, leaning on his hoe. "You had cause to be. But look what the Lord had planned all along." That evening, Dale hung the wooden cross above the hearth again, the same spot where it had witnessed their first tentative steps toward love. Ellen watched him, Samuel nursing contentedly at her breast. The simple action felt like coming full circle, like completion. As darkness settled over Bitter Creek, they sat together by the fire. Dale cradled Samuel, his rough, voice gentle as he hummed an old hymn. The baby's eyes drifted closed, tiny fingers curled around his father's thumb. Ellen leaned against Dale's shoulder, breathing in the peace of the moment. "They said I couldn't bear fruit," she whispered, touching Samuel's downy head. Dale's smile glowed in the firelight. They were right. God did. Outside their window, late spring snowflakes drifted lazily past, glowing orange in the lamplight. But inside the cabin, warmth and peace reigned supreme. The room that had once witnessed Ellen's despair now held their joy, their love, their miracle. Samuel stirred in his sleep, making those soft baby sounds that melted their hearts. Dale pressed a kiss to Ellen's temple, and she closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanksgiving. The past, the pain, the doubt, the fear, felt distant now, transformed by grace into something beautiful. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Above them, the wooden cross caught the light, a reminder of the faith that had brought them through the storm. Through the window, they could see stars beginning to pierce the evening sky, bright and steady as God's promises. Here in their sanctuary at Bitter Creek, surrounded by the wild beauty of God's creation, they had found everything they never knew they were seeking. Love had grown where there was once only emptiness. Hope had bloomed in barren soil, and in their arms slept the living proof that with God, truly nothing was impossible. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.